Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to the Tech Town Hall. I am your host, William Goldie, the head of sales here at PTZOptics and HuddleCam HD. And this month we have a super cool, I guess kind of also an announcement to talk about on the PTZOptics product line. We added MIDI to our ability to control our cameras. Now, if you're not familiar with MIDI, it is a language protocol and digital interface, more or less, that is predominantly used in the music world. Now, we are on the tail of the NAMM show, or North American Music Merchants show, where we were with the MIDI Association, as we're the first PTZ camera brand to adopt MIDI control natively in the camera. And we are joined today again by Stephen and Matt Davis to talk about what MIDI means in the video world, how it's going to integrate with our cameras, and the overall greater world of MIDI. So, without further ado, we're going to pass it on over to those gentlemen. Gentlemen, how are we today?
Doing well, man.
Yeah, doing pretty good. Glad to be here again.
Awesome,
We were just
awesome.
trying to figure out how we could upstage your Vanna White impression. So we're just trying to figure that out. You just have you had that nailed.
I'm just the PTZOptics and HuddleCam Vanna White at the end of the day. Let's be perfectly honest. Kind eyes and a nice voice. Anyway, gentlemen, so we're here to talk about MIDI. MIDI is wild to me because I think we determined there's something like 200 or 300,000 different MIDI controllers in the world. Also at NAMM, a kid walked up with a bass guitar that also had a keyboard and a MIDI pad on it as well. And we figured out that he could actually control our PTZOptics cameras from his bass. So if that's anything to set the stage for how kind of, complex this conversation is, I think that's a good starting point. So, Stephen, I believe you have a little bit of a presentation. Matt, I think we're going to dive into the technology. So, as Vanna White would do now, I'm going to pass it over to you, gentlemen.
Absolutely. Man, how are we going to follow this up? This is like
I think we need more space. Like I feel so confined here. I can't really, do the Vanna White thing. I'm just not. I can't live up to it.
We're just heads in a box, right? With
exactly
with this kind of stuff. So I know the questions that come up. I mean, obviously this MIDI stuff has been in the music world for all these years, and now having the ability to bring it to the broadcast platform is pretty cool. I wanted to kind of show, and we can kind of talk about this here, what MIDI actually looks like. Everybody wants to see what it looks like. What is MIDI? And like when you put it into software, you get like these little Tetris rectangles, right? These are like these little representations depending on how long you're pressing a key down. Like if you were playing a keyboard, the longer you hold it down, the longer the line's going to be. If you're just going to touch the key or just hit it once, you'll get the little squares. It makes it easy for music production to edit a song, isolate noises from, using MIDI. I use it with my drum set to where if I'm recording, I can get rid of any kind of unnecessary noises. So it makes it really easy. Here you can see another way to do it. But Matt, to implement this into broadcast, this really opens up a whole new world for not just having buttons go on and off, right?
Yeah. So between knobs, between sliders, you start to gain a whole new world of very, very unique control options. To kind of further just beyond the note, I mean, MIDI's even keeping track of how much pressure you're putting on that note. So the ability to really customize how you're interfacing with any other product is pretty amazing, actually. It goes beyond just a simple, push button. So yeah, I mean, as we bring this into the world of broadcast, where it starts to get exciting is the wealth of new controllers. So you're no longer just confined to traditional production controllers, and you can start to mix and match things. And where that gets really, really exciting for at least a small handful of people. I'm thinking of all you people out there that have said you want an absolute control solution. I know you're out there. You're heavy in the broadcast industry. Now you have it. You can use MIDI interfaces to gain absolute control over your cameras at this point.
And I think that's pretty awesome because I mean I've been using MIDI for a long time. As I'm showing you some uh, controllers that I've used over the years, and including in my studio currently. Um, Having this ability now, uh, whether you're a musician, whatever you are, as Will alluded to, the first thing I said to Matt when he said about, we've got MIDI now with PTZ Optics. I'm like, wow, I can, if I'm not a electric drummer, I can get an electric pad and assign that presets for our cameras. And as I'm playing the drums, hit it and have it switch cameras or switch presets. You just opened up the world to be able to switch while these guys are doing YouTube instructionals, videos, whatever instrument that they're playing. And there's so many options. Like I have here, I'm going to show Matt on my desk here. There's some of my personal MIDI controllers, but you'll notice there's like a hockey puck looking thing right there, right? And this is made by X Keys. It's actually a foot switch. So you can actually trigger MIDI using that foot pedal. It connects with a 1/8" end into they have a specific USB interface that converts it to MIDI. So you can basically, Matt, if you're playing guitar and you wanted to step on it to change presets, you know, you've got it right there. Or if you're, a single
Yep.
producer, you've got options.
Yeah, especially if you're doing, anything in the music realm. Most instruments at this point have some way, even if it's an accessory or an add-on, to interface with MIDI software and devices. So the world just starts to open up on you don't really need as many producers in the mix to start creating your content. You probably need a really good post-production individual, but now you can gain all these automatic camera angles and I guess something that we haven't mentioned, we've just been talking about the hardware. You get things like ProPresenter out there.
Hmm.
ProPresenter allows you to automate so much using MIDI in the background that now you can have ProPresenter actually control the cameras as you're moving through your presentation, which, I mean, that just makes somebody's workflow simple, simple, simple.
Yeah, and for those that don't know, ProPresenter is mainly used. This is used in houses of worship, and a lot, believe it or not, concerts. Guys that are doing
Hmm.
concerts and showing digital displays in their concerts, they'll use ProPresenter. There's other software like Easy Worship, but these types of software from Renewed Vision, uh, Matt, 100% agree with that. That's a great option for people.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it just opens up a whole new world of automation. That's kind of the key. One of the big things we keep hearing more and more about, even though people aren't directly asking for more automation, they're starting to learn that higher end production requires a lot of workflows and thought, and they allow people to automate as much of that as possible just leads to much better productions in the end.
So with this, with the PTZ cameras, let's kind of talk a little bit about this because I know we've got some videos that show how to set this up and whatnot. But for the average person out there, they're sitting there, they're going, okay, this sounds great. I'd love to be able to do this. I'm technically challenged. Is this really difficult to do?
This is really, really, really easy. So to get set up, really all you need to do is have your PTZ Optics camera on your network. You'll open the web interface and you'll be presented with a MIDI control option. It will look for any USB connected, Bluetooth connected MIDI interface and instantly allow you to select it and start mapping. Um, you can even map one controller to multiple cameras if you want to. You can have multiple controllers interfacing with a single camera. So you really get a neat capability to not have to think about who's controlling. As long as you've set everything ahead of time, you know when that note happens, cameras are moving to the right spot. So beyond that, once it's plugged in, you're literally able to see what keys represented and assign preset saves, preset recalls, driving the camera around, and more functionality to come as time progresses. But you have a very, very easy method actually of controlling the cameras based on your existing workflow. We're not making you change your existing setup, because with MIDI, that's not really an option. So we have something that'll play nice with your existing setups at this point, and it is really easy to use.
And a lot of people ask the question, like you've seen some of the MIDI controllers that I have in my studio here, and you go, well, that's great and all. Like Matt said, I don't want to change my whole setup. You don't have to. Even if you have a hardware controller, like I have an X key sitting here. It's right behind me. I can literally walk back there and control my TriCaster and vmix from that controller using MIDI, giving me the ability to basically, Matt, walk around and not have to be confined to my desk here. Like if I'm doing demonstrations or using our tracking camera, I could still control the switcher and bring you up and do things. It's opened so many doors
Yeah.
where before we
I
didn't
mean,
have that.
nothing's defined.
Right.
Right like you're saying there, nothing's defined. It's really saying, hey, what are you doing? Cool, let's adapt to what you're doing. Which I do feel like in this modern age is really what people are looking for. They've come up with their own ideas on solving their own problems. They're not really looking for somebody to add a wrinkle into their
Right.
plans.
Back in the day when I was using Wirecast as a switcher, and I was Mac based. And so, with macros and everything, it's always PC based, but I had Mac, so I had to run Wirecast on there. We had to cobble things together to make it work. There was a program that I'm going to show you here. It's a free program. It's called MIDI Pipe. Basically would take AppleScript and convert it to MIDI so you could utilize the control within a Mac. And like I remember buying, let me see if I can pull this up here real quick so people can see this. I don't know if you remember this too, the Korg Nano controller. This controller, I had it set up, as you can see here, with the faders in between it. They're all numbered. Because of MIDI, I could get that opacity level on a lower third rather than just on and off. I could travel that lower third, as you can see the sliders in the middle. So I could then essentially have the ghost effect where you could do something like you could kind of, let me go with a lower third here and see if we can do that on the DSK here. You could kind of set it up to where it just fades in just ever so slow like that. And get that where you couldn't do that. It was either on or off. Like you had it on or off. There was no fading. There was no nothing. And you could set it up for, shot 1, shot 2. And then we had the knobs at the top, Matt, which was cool because like this 2-box here with professional switchers, it's easy. You could just click on something or turn a dial. On these, you couldn't do it. It was absolute. You just you had to press it. Well, with the knob, you could actually set it with MIDI to rotate through all your guests that you set.
Oh, that's nice.
And set up a 2-shot to just be able to switch to whoever. So MIDI really was huge for us doing that. So having this now with the PTZOptics cameras, I'm really interested and curious to see what kind of limits we can break with some of this because it opens up so many doors.
Yeah. Well, and based on that picture, for anyone that isn't aware, when I mentioned absolute control and that these people keep asking for it, that Korg controller is an excellent example where if we look at the slider on 1, and the slider on 2 and the slider on 3, what we basically can do with absolute control is we've got our center line. That's home. So the way it's shown right now would be a home location. You could assign one of those sliders to your pan, one to your tilt, one to your zoom, one to your focus. And at that point, you move it a quarter of the way up. Your camera moves a quarter of the way up. So it absolute means if you see it's 3/4 of the way, it's going to have moved 3/4 of the way in that direction.
So in essence, like if you have something with knobs like the loop deck or the stream, basically the loop deck and some of the X keys, or even the Korg that has a knob at the top, you could essentially pan with that, right? You could set it to pan left to right,
Yes.
or
Yep.
Vice versa.
Yeah, exactly. And even if you want to get to the buttons, you can use them to drive the cameras, and you just have a little stop command that you wind up using then. But yeah, that it opens up a world of new ways to interface with the camera. And while we were at shows like Infocom recently and starting to mention this to integrators, the amount of interest in they loved the cameras, but when they found out that this was an option and realized that they could take things further and further refine their workflows, oh, it just seemed like smiles popped up left and right.
And I was going to pull it up on my phone, but there is we're talking about hardware items, right? But Stream Deck Elgato actually makes an iPhone app, which I thought I had it on my phone, but I don't. I have it on my iPad. But it'll actually work just like hardware. If you don't need tactile feedback, you could essentially control your PTZ controller. And I know we have apps, but if you're working on this and you're controlling other things with your Stream Deck, that's, I think, where the power really comes in, because now you have one controller that controls everything.
Yes. And yeah, you can find similar things like on Windows. If you wanted to trial this without buying a MIDI controller, I will venture to say, though, you will find very, very affordable MIDI controllers out on the market. Don't think you need to start with the latest and greatest, most expensive. You will find, and projects, want to turn a little Raspberry Pi into a MIDI controller. Easily done with hundreds of tutorials out there. But if you did want to just play with some software on Windows, there's at least something called Loop MIDI, Loop MIDI. And that allows you to start doing virtual MIDI interfaces with software. So you can start playing with this without even investing in a MIDI controller off the bat.
I'm going to see if I can pull that up for everybody here. The Loop MIDI, I guess it is, right?
Yeah.
Let's see if we can pull that. So they have they have it for iOS too, huh? And it's open source.
Well, yeah. Not playing on there as often. I might have glazed over that, I'll admit.
No, that's cool that they have a bunch of different options here, and probably builders, right? So you can build.
Yeah, so it creates like a virtual MIDI interface, for your PC, and then you can use DAWs or MIDI, software implementations to interface with it and then control the camera. So even if it doesn't natively have that MIDI capability to virtualize itself in your PC, you now have a nice way to do that and start playing with MIDI without any extra investment going on.
I know from my side of things, MIDI has really taken off recently, not just obviously with us with the PTZ cameras, but I've seen other companies really getting behind MIDI, because I think they've found now, they finally come to realize that, wow, the broadcast industry can use this, where before it was just always thought of as being, for musicians and, artists alike, right?
Well, and I think one of the neatest things about getting to interact, with the MIDI organization and how they operate, I just got to do a little plug for them here because I was so impressed. Everything's open. The neat thing when you get all these companies together that participate in the MIDI organization, even if they're competitors, it's one of the few spots where you're going to see them working together because of the love they have for this standard. And it's open. You get to see everything. There's nothing hidden. There's nothing proprietary. It gives everybody a common ground to work from, which is really a beautiful, beautiful thing.
So I guess to convey this to everybody out there, don't be afraid. Go out. There's MIDI controllers. Like I said, I showed you guys a few of the ones that I have here, and I can pull this up. These are very inexpensive MIDI controllers. I think that Launchpad is under $200. The Loop Deck.
How much is a Stream Deck? The little
Stream
guy.
Deck.
I can't even remember.
I want to say it's like 150, and I think the biggest one that I showed in the pictures, I want to say it's like 300 or 250. But they have sales on Amazon. You can get them, cyber deals if you need to wait for that. But you're not spending. Let's put it this way: there's hardware controllers out there for driving your professional production switchers that are in the thousands to control TriCasters and ATEMs, things like that. I mean, that's what you're doing. But you can get these for a fraction of that price. So $300 is not bad for a MIDI controller. And I've kind of quite a few.
You take that step back and you start saying, well, most broadcast controllers are all built the same, which means it's not really for everyone. You learn to use it, but it might not actually be naturally comfortable for you. The beauty now is you can go and find these MIDI controllers, and they come in so many styles and varieties that you can probably find something that's almost catered to your exact needs and your style and your movements, and not just be relegated to use the same thing that everybody's been using for a long time, because that's what everybody's been using.
So I'm gonna pull up here really quick on Amazon. Just we were talking about this. So the middle sized one is $149. Here they got one custom 15 pack of LCD keys. I guess that's just an add-on. Let me see here. I thought maybe they'd have that small one, but they're bringing up the stream.
Yeah, I think
deck.
the small one has been selling out very, very quickly, is what's been going on there.
Yeah, that only has like 9 buttons. Oh, here's a 32. Let's see what the 32 is. $249.
Yeah.
And then you have a 6 key.
And these get you up and running like instantly.
80 bucks, man.
There's a MIDI plugin, so you're not even having to figure much out. It's very, very easy to use.
So here is the MIDI plugin. Should we just really quickly just kind of
run through it?
Yeah, if we were going to set this up. So the MIDI plugin's down here on the right-hand side for those that are. Let me go full screen so you guys can actually see this a little bit better. I already installed it. I just went to Elgato's site, typed in MIDI, and this is what it downloads. So there's a bunch of options, Matt, under here, like control change, program change.
Yeah.
Where
So,
do we
like,
want to
two
start?
of the big ones, if we were to look at them, that most people are probably going to use, are a control change, or a CC, as it gets called sometimes, and then the node on or node off. The control change is one where you're going to have more variation. Like if you wanted to drive the camera, that would be a way you could drive it to the left or right, pan, tilt, zoom. The node on, node off is more of a like a traditional preset recall, or a preset set would be the better way to look at them. You could drive the camera, but it's not as ideal as using, absolute control, which is really, really nice. I now get why you were all asking for it for so long.
So it looks like we can just title this whatever we want to call it. Like if we want to call it pan, we could we just type pan and the channel.
Yep. So these are things where you're going to be able to set them here. When you are connected to the camera, you're going to push that button on the Stream Deck, and it's instantly going to tell you what you're mapping to. You can obviously assign it to any preset, or setting anything, or driving the camera, but the reality is you might not be an expert. You might not know all the note that it's sending. But that's where the web interface is going to help you do that at this point. You don't need to be the expert. You just need to say, hey, I push this button that I want to, recall preset 3. Well, great. You can easily do that. The interface will just take care of it for you.
So that's the cool part with all this. I do something similar with the TriCaster, where I work it over the network, and I use MIDI and macro controllers to do so. So, I mean, it's very simple. Like you said, just press buttons, but that's, you literally
there really isn't much to it.
You drag and drop and, work on it. But like, again, we have on the PTZOptics YouTube channel, we have some videos on how to do that, or we'll have some videos even more to help you do this if you're interested in that sort of thing. But
if there's one thing I've learned about starting to dive into this world, is I think there's a lot to learn. There's going to be a lot of exciting new options, and a lot of people that maybe didn't typically do production getting into video production that are going to bring all sorts of new ideas. I'm just really excited to see what people start doing with this.
Absolutely. So, Will, we're going to pitch it back to you in the studio for any kind of questions.
You can kind of see on the screen behind me, these are 3 innovations that, well, I don't know why I did air quotes. These are 3 things that got innovated recently that use MIDI control in a very, very interesting way that we saw at NAMM. First, this looks like a regular violin, but the actual fingerboard is a MIDI controller. So, Matt, when you're talking about pressure-sensitive controls, effectively that violin can control PTZOptics cameras now, which is awesome. I don't know if there's a real-world use case for that, but it's just cool. But this guy, it's actually an ODD ball. And basically what it does is it has gyroscopes and accelerometers in it. And based on those actions that it uses, it can actually send MIDI controls. So one of the things we thought about is if you're a presenter and you have a camera on you and you need to change its position or rotate it or whatever, you could have that ball sitting on a table next to you and you could actually spin it and that might rotate a camera. Or if you bounced it on the ground, that would call a preset and then the camera would go to your preset. So you could almost manage all of your camera control as a presenter just using a bouncy ball. And plus it's a bouncy ball, so it adds entertainment value anyway. So those were just some of the kind of wild things that we saw at NAMM that used MIDI control. And that's kind of a way we could just start to pique people's curiosity and interest to start to develop things. Because, you know, Stephen, you made the great point of, you know, I think the cool part about us adding MIDI to our cameras is really seeing what comes of it, because there's so much innovation out there. There's so many people coming up with unique MIDI-based products that really, I think it's going to be kind of wild to see what people come up with. And we're you know, taking our hands off the wheel on this one. We're just going to let the marketplace and engineers and everyone out there kind of come up with their own ideas. So I think that's going to be by far the coolest part about the whole MIDI application and addition to PTZOptics. So very cool stuff to come. With that, speaking of stuff to come, Matt, I think my first question is towards you. So as we were talking to a lot of these people at trade shows, both Infocom and NAMM, people brought up the question of MIDI 2 and what the difference is. Now, my understanding is MIDI 1 is an 8-bit system, so there are some limitations there, but MIDI 2 is going to solve for that. Can you just briefly touch on what that means and what's coming down the pike for MIDI?
With MIDI 1, like you were talking about, you're limited to 8 bits. You're limited on how many data points you have to work with. So if we're thinking about like a pan range for a camera, well, with MIDI 1, and don't quote me on this, you're limited to say 128 points to make that entire arc. So, you know, there's only so granular that gets. You can't make a perfect, beautiful sweep. Whereas when you move to MIDI 2, you've now greatly increased that number by, I don't remember what fold, but now you actually have so many extra points that you can actually make these beautiful sweeps using it. So you get a lot more granular control over the cameras, at least as it directly applies to us. It allows us to offer people the full capabilities to control something just like it was a production control system, even though it's now leveraging MIDI to do a lot of that.
And I'm sure that we'll have more questions about MIDI 2 as we start to adopt that and as it starts to get applied to our cameras as well. So more to come on that. We'll have a follow-up part 2 when MIDI 2 is released. So gentlemen, this is kind of a general question. I know we've shown a lot of things like the bouncy ball and the violin and all these kind of things. What is like a realistic real world use case that you can think of, just basic setup? I know we talked about different controllers, but let's say you're a church and you have these MIDI controllers. I mean, is it just as simple as, hey, this is just for presets or this is for full control? Like what is your, let's say a video person who has a MIDI device, what is the basic conversation there? How do you talk to video people about MIDI?
So I guess as somebody that is heavily involved in the house of worship space, I think one of the big things that I tell people in other churches about is what we mentioned when Matt and I were doing this discussion, was the ability to control everything from one controller. That's huge in the house of worship space, because volunteers are limited on their knowledge of anything video. So you're working with very green folks. I mean, and that's not a slam, it's just a reality. And you might only have 2 or 3 volunteers that are available at any given moment, right? So being able to use MIDI on a single controller allows that one person to control everything and not needing more and more volunteers that really you don't have. So I guess when I approach it, having that ability plus the ability to control things that maybe you couldn't normally control in the live production environment, now you can because of MIDI. That's where it opens doors, like Matt said, with controlling Pro Presenter with it. These are huge in the house of worship space, having that ability. So, Matt, I don't know if you have anything you want to add to that, or.
I mean, it's going to be a slight aside, but you know, I'll take that same concept towards, you know, music studios where you're seeing people put in video production systems left and right, but the problem is normally you don't have anyone to really operate it. Well, now the same software you're using to record the audio typically can be used to control the cameras. So, you don't need any video production expert on site. You really can start to set up a lot of studios and have it automatically know when it sees certain notes, certain sounds, certain interactions to move to certain locations. So, putting 4 cameras into a small recording studio so that you don't need somebody live producing it starts to gain a lot of value very quickly.
Yeah, 100% on that. Actually, one of the interesting things that somebody recommended to me was, I guess they use MIDI control to adjust different lights in like a concert hall, small, medium, large concert hall. And then they suggested, oh, so if I like hit this preset for my lights to go to this spot on the stage, that can trigger a preset so all the cameras go to that same like highlighted point of the stage. And it really didn't occur to us prior to that, but we're like, oh yeah, now your lighting guy is your video guy, so you don't have to hire another person. And it's just those types of integrations that are kind of, again, it's going to be very interesting to see what people come up with. Speaking of control, Justin, who's in the audience live right now, asked, can you switch between cameras in a live production using MIDI, and if so, how?
So with as long as you're using like a piece of software that is going to allow that, right? You have to have something like a vmix or an OBS to that's going to accept it. Which vmix, I believe OBS also does accepts MIDI. A lot of your switchers will
I think
do
a
that.
plugin for OBS.
Is it a plugin? Okay.
I think I could be mistaken.
A lot, just like NDI, a lot of their stuff. So that would be the way to do it within. You'd have to use a piece of software. I think outside of that, I think you would have to use something like what Matt was showing for the PC. I don't know a lot about that software. Maybe you can kind of tag on to that one with that particular piece of software.
I mean, I think you actually hit on the real thing there, which, if you wanted to automate that camera switching, that's going to come down to the software you're using. So ultimately, yeah, you get a vmix and OBS, and I'm sure there's others that also listen to MIDI. But that's where, as long as it listens to MIDI, yeah, you can use that same controller to call presets, to change scenes, to pull up lower thirds, really kind of the sky's the limit. Start dreaming.
Yeah, because I do something similar with that before we had MIDI with the Simple Track 2, where I could set up that to trigger a macro over the network, to where I just put my hand in a certain spot, it would drop my lower third. You guys have probably seen the videos in the past where I've done that. So essentially, you could do something similar where it switches a camera. Maybe it's pulling down the lower third at the same time, but again, it has to accept that MIDI input, and you'd be able to do that.
Well, there you go, Justin. Question answered. Yeah, I mean, the more we talk about this, the more it sounds like this is one of those interesting pieces of technology, I think, because it sounds like the answer is yes. It's like, hey, can I do this with MIDI? It's like, yeah. You just kind of have to like figure out how to make it work, but pretty much the answer is yes when it comes to like camera control or even production control in general. So yeah, I don't think that there's much more we can talk about other than we're really excited to see what the future brings, because more and more people are going to just develop different uses of putting cameras into a MIDI environment and adopting the technology. One of the things, Matt, actually, you and I were talking about at Infocom, it seems like the world of IT, the world of video, and the world of audio, they're all kind of coming together even more so, and those lines are blurring even greater every day with every new adoption of technology. And MIDI, like NDI and the rest of the things that we've adopted to PTZOptics, is just that next step. So it's going to be, the world is going to basically dictate the direction that a lot of these developments go. So it's going to be very, very interesting to see. Gentlemen, I don't have any other questions. Any other thoughts before we step out of this one?
If you do something really cool with this, send it to our marketing team, because we would love to see or hear about it. And I'm saying this somewhat selfishly from the engineering perspective. We would love to hear some of these cool things you're doing to give us new ideas.
Yeah, and I would say,
Yeah.
and Matt, maybe you could tack on the Linux side. There's pretty much any piece of software that'll control MIDI, whether you're Mac or your PC. Like I showed you MIDI pipes. I'm sure there's other ones out there. I believe there should be some for Linux, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, definitely. I have no doubts about it. No doubts about it at all.
So if you're using something like that, that's not the norm Windows, and like Matt said, doing something really cool, I know
Well,
I'd be curious to see it.
You hit it on it earlier, actually. iOS and Android. You'll find,
yeah.
you know, literally the list goes on and on. There's so many MIDI options. It's astronomical.
And because of those so many options, I think we're going to tap different verticals and different markets and people we didn't even think about when we were going through the virtualization of the world via the pandemic, or as a result of the pandemic, I should say. That was the other cool thing is at NAMM, people came up to us and they said, oh, we've been looking for a camera solution for the last 2 years. And you realize that the music world, they know Sweetwater. They don't even know about people like B&H and Adorama and all these other places. So they just couldn't even, they don't even know what a PTZ camera is. So we were able to, you know, integrate with them. And that's going to be very cool to see what happens there. I don't think we have any more questions from the crowd either. So we'll go ahead and wrap it up. Thank you again for joining us in the monthly Tech Town Hall. Again, I am William Goldie. We are joined by Stephen Haywood and Matt Davis to talk about MIDI this month. And as they said, if you come up with anything cool that involves MIDI and PTZOptics, please let us know. You can email marketing@or partners@ptzoptics.com. Thank you again so much. If you like this, please subscribe, please follow, please get the notifications, and be involved in the conversation. The only way we know that we're doing something cool is if you tell us. We think it's cool, but if you think it's cool, we want to know. So stay in touch with us. Thank you so much for stopping by this month. We'll see you again in July.